in a sense, what God wants to do is break that form of idolatry. Idolatry? Is that the right word? Idolatry. Yes. Okay. Who has Ezekiel 26:9? Ezekiel? No? Did I not give it to somebody? Did you give it to somebody? You got it? Did I just do that? You got it? I got you. I got you. I could read it. Here we go. On that day, I swore to them that I would bring them out of the land of Egypt into the land that I had searched out for them, a land flowing with milk and honey, the most glorious of all lands. And I said to them, cast away the detestable things your eyes feast on, every one of you, and do not defile yourselves with the idols of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. But they rebel against me and will not listen to me. Not one of them cast away the detestable things their eyes feasted on, nor do they forsake the idols of Egypt. Then I thought I would pour out my wrath upon them and spend my anger against them in the midst of the land of Egypt. But I acted for the sake of my name. In other words, he was honoring his covenant. Because remember, this is referencing to what happened when Moses went up to get the commandments. After 40 days, what are the Israelites doing again? They're worshiping another God, and we'll cover that in a second. But I acted for the sakes of my name, that it should not be profane in the sight of the nations among whom they live, in whose sight I made myself known to them in bringing them out of the land of Egypt. There's this whole concept that they might have fallen short of honoring the covenant, falling short of creating a greater gap away from God's way, operating at a lower level of calling. But God will not do that. God will still honor his covenant with us. So God also makes his intent clear in Exodus 7, where he tells Moses that, hey, go and tell Pharaoh that to let my people go and they will serve me into the wilderness. And this key word of serve, in Hebrew, the word serve also means ministry. It's the same meaning. Let my people go into the wilderness so they perform the ministry for me. So there's really is a strong sense of liturgy taking place here. The liturgy. It starts from here, and there's this whole parallel taking place in terms of tradition that is being established. So God wants the Israelites to serve them and worship them, not the false god of Egypt, and he's willing to go to great lengths to make that happen. So obviously we know the response, and here comes the plagues, and we know there are 10 plagues. That's not very random. There were 10 commandments. There's a lot of parallels going on here. But let me point out something that frankly it wasn't too evident to me, but this study allowed me to notice that these were not 10 random plagues. It wasn't just 10 random plagues. There's a lot of parallels here. And all of them have to do with God's way of passing judgment on the gods of Egypt, on these idols that the people have been idolizing, the idols were taking place. So God goes out of his way to be like, hey, I'm going to pass judgment on all these gods that you have been worshiping for the past 400 years. Look what I'm going to do. I'm going to send you 10 plagues in Egypt. Okay. So a few of the examples that we have in the book of Numbers, and we could talk about, for example, the first plague, where God turns the waters of the Nile into blood. Basically, what the correlation being made there is that he's showing his victory over the Egyptian god Hapi, H-A-P-I, who governed the Nile River. Okay? And we see this in Exodus 7:14-25. The second plague, for example, the plague of frogs, it was a way to mock the frog goddess Heket? I don't know. We could read it there. Okay. Now, a couple of more plagues that we see, for example, the fifth plague, God destroys the cattle, judging the bull god Apis. This time is This time is Apis. And we're going to see this god again when Moses comes down from the mountain. Okay, so pay attention to this one. And the ninth plague, we see that God covers Egypt with the plague of darkness for 3 days. Who is he defeating? I bet you even know this answer. Ra, right? The sun god of Ra, right? And we see movies with this. So it is important to know that up to this point, and I didn't know this, that the Israelites have not been directly affected by all these plagues. All these first 9 plagues, they're only affecting the Egyptians. All these 9 plagues are only affecting the Egyptians. And it's a way for God to disciple the pharaohs. And God basically tells us that he's sparing the people and the animal living in the land of Goshen. That's where the Israelites are. That's where they live, and so they're spared from the 9 plagues that are affecting all the Egyptians. But the 10th plague affects everybody. And what is the 10th plague? Well, this is where God basically, Pharaoh still refusing to let God's firstborn, right, the firstborn of all the nations, he punishes the Pharaoh by taking away his firstborn. And a lot of interesting thing happens with this plague, which are basically a key core. This understanding is a key core to the establishment of the Passover. Because of this, right, he tells Moses, that God is going to, Moses tells Pharaoh, hey, God is going to send his angel of death to slay all the firstborns of Egypt, and specifically the firstborn male offsprings and all their livestock. So this is going to affect everybody, including animals. Animals, which again is a reference to gods, Egyptian gods. So, and unlike the first 9 plagues, the Israelites would not be spared from this plague, simply because they are the Israelites. So, in fact, if they want their firstborn to survive, they have to choose to do something. They have to collaborate with God. This whole concept of collaborating with God, they got to answer to God's calling. They have to choose to obey God, to align himself to his way, because it's free will, right? Otherwise, he'd be a God of puppets, right? Just forcing people around. And they have to perform what we know as the Passover sacrifice, which basically is God outlines exactly for Moses what they need to be doing through this ritual. And essentially what you have here is the sacrifice of an unblemished lamb. You guys understand what it means by unblemished? No broken legs, no deformations. Basically, it's this whole concept of a healthy lamb, okay? Which, as I describe this, I want you to think of Christ, okay? And especially that moment where Christ's legs are not broken in the cross. He's an unblemished. He's not injured from that perspective. There's some correlation to that. The second thing is they got to take their blood and spread it into their doorpost. Okay, literally take some blood and spread it into their doorpost. And then they have to eat a sacred meal. So do a sacrifice, spread some blood, and eat this sacred meal. So as they follow this direction, the angel of death, will pass over. Thus, the Passover. And if they see this, they will spare their firstborn. And in Exodus 12, we see that God carries out this judgment. And when it's over, the Pharaoh finally concedes, and he lets the Israelites go. Well, we know what happens next. Basically, Moses takes his people through the desert and leads them through the Red Seas, and he parts the waters for the Israelites, and he drowns the Egyptian soldiers that the Pharaoh sent to basically, when he began to regret his decision. And at this point, everything should be, in a sense, after the Egyptians are done, right? You think, oh, well, perfect. The Israelites have been sent. Everything will be sunshine from now on. But we know that's not what happens. So Moses led them out of bondage to the Red Sea, and now they're on the way to the promised land, right? God just delivered us from bondage. We're on the way to the promised land. You would think so, anyhow, that everybody will be rejoicing after this, especially after such a great miracle of the parting of the Red Seas and destroying the Egyptian. The parting was one miracle. Destroying the Egyptian army altogether was another miracle. And after only 3 days, what do the Israelites begin to do? They start to complain. Hey, we're thirsty. It's been we're thirsty. We're hungry. And God responds to these complaints about hunger. What does he do? He sends out the miracle of the manna, the bread that comes from heaven, in order to feed them. And then the Israelites, even though God is doing it, the Israelites begin to complain again. Hey, but there's no water. And how does God respond this time? Well, he gives them the miracles, water that flows forth from the rock. Moses taps the rock, and there's water that flows from that. Now, it's important to understand that in 1 Corinthians, St. Paul explained that all these events are foreshadowing the new covenant of Christ. Who has 1 Corinthians 10:16? Yeah, please. When the Israelites are passing through the Red Sea, the first sentence of that is that they were passing through some sort of cloud and passing through the sea. It's a type of baptism taking place. It's a type of spiritual baptism taking place there. And this reminds me a little bit of that weird ritual that God made with Abraham when he is about to sacrifice Isaac. Takes the ram and he divides the animal in two, and God walks in the middle. It's a similar parallel taking place there. This whole concept of parting of the sea, walking through the middle. It's another one of those rituals taking place that precedes basically a major covenant. And let's see, where was I? Lost sight of it. Okay, so and there were also, as they passed through the cloud and the sea, it's a type of baptism. They were also fed from the bread from heaven, foreshadowing the true bread from heaven, which is to come, which is Jesus, which we receive through the Eucharist. But despite what they received, the Israelites did not trust, and they did not remain faithful. Even though they were receiving all these things to their pride, to their thirst, to their hunger, they did not remain faithful. They did not believe that God would provide them with their needs. In fact, no matter how much proof God gave them to take care of them, they basically refused to trust God and eventually broke faith with him. So let's take a look at what happens when they break faith with God. So after several days of leading his people through the desert, the Lord brings them back to Mount Sinai. And he announces his plans to all the Israelites. And he says, well, go ahead and tell them that to make them into a holy nation and a royal priesthood. This is in Exodus. You can find these words in Exodus 19. A holy nation and a royal priesthood. That's God's intent. These are the chosen people among all the nations of the world to fulfill a holy nation, a royal priesthood. And he does, in a sense, attach a requirement to that promise. He tells them, you have to obey my voice and keep my covenant. In order for this to be fulfilled, you got to obey my voice and keep my covenant. And then he tells them to do that, and he gives Moses the 10 Commandments. And he also gives Moses the book of the covenant. A lot of times we missed it. He gave Moses the 10 Commandments, but he gives him the book of the covenant as well. And basically what that is civil laws. That basically civil laws like we have today about how to deal with different criminal actions such as murder, violence, and theft. If you want to learn more about that, look at Exodus 21 to 23. How many of you guys know that? That he gives him the 10 Commandments and he gives him the book of covenants, book of laws. That's something that always skipped me. And in fact, in the movie, you only see the 10 Commandments, right? And what do you see? He breaks it. But no, he gives him a bunch of laws as well on how to practically deal with the Israelites. So the first covenant, after God finished giving Moses his laws, comes a special ceremony that basically it binds God forever into a special covenant relationship with the Israelites. Who has Exodus 24, 3 through 8? We have it? No? Maybe? Should I read it? You have it? Please. So I have a surprise for you guys. I got a bash of blood. I'm going to sprinkle it over you guys. Doesn't that seem a little strange? You know, what was taking place? You know, it's one thing, hey, take me to the wilderness, kill some animals. But now it's like, you know, first you splash the doorpost, and now it's splashing the altar, and now splashing everybody, right? Seems, if that doesn't shock you a little bit, let me just say, I'm just glad that I'm on this part of the timeline on salvation history, because I don't know if you ever had animal blood on you. That thing is very sticky. It's very extremely sticky. Okay, so I mean, it makes you wonder: did they shower after that? What happened after being sprinkled with blood? So this is indeed a strange ceremony, but for the Israelites, they knew exactly what this sharing of blood meant. They knew that if they broke the covenant that was being made, they would bring down some heavy curses upon themselves. And the blood of the sacrificial animals symbolizes, in a sense, those curses. Hey, don't forget, you break this covenant, some curses are going to find out. This is a quick reminder of what this is. In effect, when they were participating in this ceremony, what they were saying is, if we break this covenant, let it be done unto us what was done to the slaughter animals. So the Israelites knew exactly what was being done here. This is a reminder that, yes, this is not, I'm sprinkling blood on you so that you never forget that if you break this covenant, this will be done upon you. You will shed blood as well. God, that's a very intense ceremony, don't you think? It's also important to know that the ceremony doesn't end with a sacrifice. It doesn't end with the sacrifice of the animals. it ends with a meal. Who has Exodus 24, 9, 11? Please. I gave you two? Okay. I- So it wasn't just Moses now that sees God. It's him, the 12 tribes, and 70 elders. And you're going to see this parallel of numbers with Christ as well. Him, 12 disciples, and 12 apostles, and 70 disciples. This is referenced in the New Testament as well. You're going to see that parallel taking place there. And what are they doing? They're eating a meal with God. So at this point, this basically, the meal reveals that Israel is a royal kingdom of priests who can eat in the very presence of God. And if you understand a little historical context, the temple of the Jews, the holiest of holiest, only one person could go in there because that was the presence of God. And if you were not that person, the chosen one, the divine one, not the divine one, the anointed one, you will be stroked. I mean, you will die. And there are references of that in Scripture, of the references is act. But now, how many people are dining here with God? Moses, the 12 tribes, and 70 other people. After the sacrifice, sprinkle of the blood, and now let's have a meal. Something that happened with the Passover, right? References the Passover as well. And something that preludes what's going to happen in the Last Supper. So, after this meal, Moses ascends to Mount Sinai, where he fasts for 40 days and 40 nights. And during this time on the mountain, God gives him a vision of the tent of worship and that the Israelites are to construct. This tent will serve as a mobile place for worship. It's kind of like the earthly home for the presence of God. And the ancient Israelites understood that what Moses saw in his vision was really the heavenly temple. Okay? And this concept of the heavenly temple, it's crucial to understand what Christ does. You know, the reference of breaking the veil of the temple. There's a beautiful reference to that. In other words, these earthly tent and temple were the copies of the heavenly temple where God is adored by all angels and saints. Who has Hebrews 8:5? Please. So here's God the architect, right? Giving Moses, here's the blueprints. You don't even need to think about this. Just do it my way. Now, we see another reference to this through the prophet Isaiah in his vision of the heavenly temple, the same heavenly temple. Who has Isaiah 6:1-3? How many wings does Seraphim have? 6. How many nations needed to be defeated? 6. I don't know. I don't think that's random. I think there's a lot of beauty. There's a lot of mathematical, poetic beauty and allegories taking place over and over again, which is just inspirational. Um, so, so here you have two scriptures that talk about this heavenly temple and how it's to mimic how this temple that Moses is doing is to mimic the temple of God where he's being worshipped by all the angels and saints. That's the representation of the temple of God here on earth. And you have the Hebrews referring to it, you have Isaac referring to it, and in fact we have St. John the Apostle that has the vision of the heavenly temple in Revelation 21:22, which you could read. It goes into more detail how this temple is what's supposed to look like. This tabernacle, through this series of events, basically, the giving of the law, right? God is giving the law. There's a ceremony of the covenant taking place, and then Moses had the vision of the blueprints of this heavenly temple. It basically, what we're learning here is that God's purpose in bringing the Israel out of Egypt was threefold. And here's his purpose. One, to teach Israel his law. Hey, you're my chosen one, but I got some laws to give you guys. And I want to help you to know how to live good and holy lives. You think you knew when you went to the commodities of the safety of the Egyptians. You thought you were safe. They made you slave. Well, I'm going to bring you back into God's way. And you got to follow my law. Here's my law. Let me be very specific with you. Here's my law. And he wanted to bring Israel, the second part, he wanted to bring Israel into his presence through worship. So away from the worshiping all the Egyptian gods, and to start worshiping God himself. And third, he wanted them to dwell with him in communion as a family. Not in a one-on-one relationship with him, but in a relationship with all of us and him, through him. It's really important to understand, okay? That the call here is never to have a one-on-one special deal with him. Hey, buddy, we know each other. I pray to you every night. It's just you and I, right? We got special covenant going on here. No. This is complete concept of bringing it back to the family. It's all of us, the living church. Now remember so Moses have a meal, the 12 tribes, 70 elders. They're in the presence of God. It's not just Moses. There's 70 elder and 12 other members. You would have think that after this great meal, they wouldn't go back to the Israelites and would have said, "Whoa, we just had a meal with God. We were all there." It wasn't just one man claiming that they had a meal with God. It was all of us. We just had a meal with God. Oh, and where's Moses? Oh, well, he went for 40 days. He went to the mountain. He'll be back in 40 days. You would think that so many witnesses to this event would have been enough to keep the people of Israel faithful to God. You would have thought so, right? But that's not what happens. We know that the people of Israel, they get very antsy after 40 days. Moses in the mountain, he's praying, he's fasting, he's getting visions of this heavenly blueprint. And what do the Israelites begin to do down below? Do they remember this great meal that they just had with God? No, that's not proof enough. No way. So as they're waiting patiently, praying for Moses and trusting that God will honor his covenant, which we know that's not what they're doing, what do they do instead? They do exactly the opposite when those 40 days that Moses is away. So Moses goes up the mountain, and people lose all hope that he will ever return. And then decide to also abandon God and go revert back into their habits. After 400 years of this habits, they revert back to it after 40 days. And what happens? Who allows this? Aaron, the brother of Moses. And what does Aaron do? He makes a golden calf. calf. How do you pronounce it? Calf. Yes, calf. And this golden calf, as we could see right over there, is the exact image of the Egyptian god of Apis, A-P-I-S, who's the bull god. And this is interesting. This is not a coincidence that they do this god. Out of all the different Egyptian gods they could have picked, they picked this one. This is not a coincidence. Because in fact, the idol that they chose to revert back to, it symbolizes the most common major temptations that the devil uses to begin to pull us away from God's way. Money, sex, and power. The idol is made of gold because it represents Israel surrendering to the idol of wealth, right? Money. The idol happens to be Apis because it's a fertility god, and tell us about the sexual immorality that is involved on this betrayal of God. Now, I just say sexual immorality. Did you know there's a major orgy that takes place in there? You didn't know that? Okay, there's a reference to it. I'll point it out to you. In verse 6 in chapter 32, we hear that the Israelites rose up to play. And this whole rose up to play is actually a euphemism for the type of fornication that takes place with them. The sex part. The god of fertility, the Apis. And again, part of the choice of Apis tells us that they're worshiping a false god of power. And besides this, being the god of fertility, the bull god, he was also the god of the firstborn. He was also a god of the firstborn. So there's represented virility, power, strength, all these three most common sins. And by worshiping it, Israel was falsely given Apis credit for their deliverance from Egypt. Don't lose don't lose sight of the timeline here. Okay, these are not years. These are a few days after they just been delivered from the Egyptian army. How quick are they to lose faith? I can relate to this. Can you not relate to this? I mean, I could relate to this. I'll go to Mass on a Sunday, and then 3 days later, I find myself sinning. It's like, what's up with that? I just went to Mass. What's going on here? I know what's good, but yet I'm falling into this. What's up with that? I mean, this is not, you should, when you read this, it should not really shock you like, oh, those Israelites, if I were in their shoes, I would have done something differently. No, you probably would have fallen into it as well. You probably would have fallen into it, especially in the appeal of money, sex, and power. I mean, we do this in less of a timeline of 40 days. We go and eat the sacred meal with God on Sunday, and we revert back to this stuff only a few days later, sometimes even hours later. So as you read this, don't be judgmental, right? Begin to relate yourself from all aspects of the story. If you don't see yourself with the Israelite, you're misreading the Bible. You should be able to see all aspects of this. Okay? That's the challenge that I give.